Well, dear ones, here we are. It is 10:30, and welcome to worship on this sunny and snowy day in Rochester, New York. It's so good to be here with you all and to get to see so many of your faces and to just be together. Let us take a deep breath in and out as we ground ourselves and center ourselves with our prelude this morning from our fabulous music director, Brock Tesfold. Good morning and welcome to the First Universalist Church of Rochester, where we are called to nurture the spirit and to serve the community. Whoever you are welcome here. Whomever you love, you are welcome here. And wherever you are coming from this morning, you are welcome here. However you find courage and however you find you are grieving, you are welcome here. All of you is welcome here. It is good, it is good, it is good to be together this morning, dear ones. Each Sunday, at the beginning of our service, we acknowledge with respect the Seneca Nation, keepers of the Western Door and part of the Haudenosaunee people, on whose ancestral and present-day lands First Universalist now stands. If you are here for the first time this morning, oh my goodness, we especially welcome you. Thank you so much for making it here onto our online worshiping community. There is a visitors form that can be found in our chat. We invite you to click on that form. Please fill it out at your convenience so that we can offer you a welcome beyond just what we can offer you here in this virtual sacred space. As we gather this morning, and as folks have already been doing, we invite you to pop into the chat, offer a greeting, a good morning, a hello, how are you? I saw something about how today was a new day. I love that. That's a great greeting for us all. So please, offer a greeting. We want to know who's here. We want to have a chance to say hello. So please, let us greet one another. Welcome, welcome to worship at First Universalist Church, my dears. Our opening hymn this morning is a hymn of comfort, solace, and just deep care. Let us join hearts and voices in singing hymn number 1002, Comfort Me, recognizing that even as we are singing muted in our own homes, we are creating a collective song across our city of Rochester, our greater community, our country, and the world. So let us join in singing hymn number 1002, Comfort Me.
Comfort me. There's a saying in 12-step circles that pain and loss are inevitable, but misery is optional. Knowing how to process grief, I think, is a big part of the secret to avoiding misery. I wish I were better at it. Sometimes loss strikes us unawares. The house that catches fire, the loved one who dies unexpectedly. Other times it sneaks up on us, the relationship that no longer works, the ancient tree in the yard in danger of falling on the house, the worn out favorite sweater, the beloved pet we finally consent to put out of its misery. We cling to these sometimes out of love, sometimes out of habit, sometimes out of fear of how it will feel to grieve. And so we avoid the feeling. We rationalize. We find things to distract us. We stumble into addictions. Myself, I tend to forget. My subconscious edits out the painful memories, and I can be startled when someone reminds me of their existence. To some degree, the editing is probably a useful coping strategy, but I'm pretty sure it also robs me of opportunities to grow. If I'm going to rediscover my grief and come to terms with it, I need the help of wise and courageous friends, the sort of friends I find in this congregation. Perhaps we can help each other. Come, let us worship together. As Reverend Lane lights the chalice at First Universalist Church, and as many of you do so in your own homes, will you join me in saying our chalice words in unison? May we be a people of welcome, here to grow in heart and mind and spirit, and may we reach out to serve our community. Please join me now in our affirmation of faith, followed by the doxology. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the source and meaning of life. Thus do we covenant with each other and with all. Khalil Gibran wrote, "There are those who give with joy, and that joy is their reward. And there are those who give with pain, and that pain is their baptism. And there are those who give and know not pain in giving, nor do they seek joy, nor give with mindfulness of virtue. They give as in yonder valley the myrtle breathes its fragrance into space. Through the hands of such as these, God speaks, and from behind their eyes, God smiles upon the earth." Please click on the link in the Zoom chat window to give online to the First Universalist Church. You could also, of course, send a check through the physical mail. The offering will now be given and gratefully received.
Dear ones, this morning we have a story from our fantastic religious education minister, Reverend Michelle Yates. I want to give you a heads up that the story may be at a lower volume on your computer, so you may need to turn up the volume in order to hear it, and then turn it back down afterwards so I do not blast your ears with the booming sound of my voice. But please enjoy this story that Rev Michelle wrote just for us and for our service this morning.
Friends, today is Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday, and I want to tell you a story about grief and courage in the wake of his death. Now, most resources I looked at, especially for kids, barely even talk about his death, let alone his assassination. And I think it's important that we talk honestly about how big grief affects us, how we have to process that as a country, and how we can move through it with courage. So it's important to know, since we've lived through the summer of 2020, we have a little taste of kind of the tension, the racial justice tension that was going on in the 1960s during the civil rights movement. We saw the outrage and the reaction to the death of George Floyd. And at that time in the 60s, things like that were happening all the time. And there were so many levels of injustice related to employment justice and fair housing. And that was one of the things that Martin Luther King Jr. was fighting for. So in April of 1968, he went to Memphis, Tennessee to support a sanitation workers strike because 2 workers had been killed in their own garbage disposal trucks because of unsafe working conditions. And he was a symbol at that point for the whole nation, for progress, for justice, for hope in this forward movement, and also for the movement for non-violence, which many people, especially in the communities of color, wondered, could this really even work? Is this going to get us anywhere? Now, Martin Luther King Jr. was receiving many threats. On the plane to Memphis, the day before he was assassinated, there was a bomb threat. He had a fever that day, and even when he was going to go to the church, he was ill, and that was the night he gave his "I've been to the mountaintop" speech, where he directly said, "I might not get there with you, but I've seen it, and I believe that it is possible." This world of justice and peace that he talked about in his "I Have a Dream" speech. Thursday evening, April 4th, 1968, he was shot in the neck and died that evening. He was on his way to dinner at a local clergy person's house. So that was a Thursday, and you can imagine that weekend, the whole country erupted. Over 100 cities had marches or rallies, and with the amount of absolute despair at losing the symbol of the movement, the one key person and symbol of this hope, people were in despair and they were angry, and not all of these rallies or protests remained peaceful, and some got quite violent and were known as the King assassination riots of 1968. On that Monday, President Lyndon Johnson declared a national day of mourning, which helped to recognize this great grief that everyone was struggling with, and how do we decide to move forward. The next day, on Tuesday, was going to be the sanitation workers' strike, and Coretta Scott King led it in her husband's place, and it became a silent march. Also that day, 4 days after MLK was killed, a bill went into Congress to name a federal holiday after him. That Wednesday was his funeral, where so many people gathered to walk alongside the farmer's cart and 2 mules to take him to his final resting place. That Friday, 2 Fridays after he had been killed, finally the Fair Housing Act that had been going around in Congress passed. And on the 16th, the Memphis union leaders and the city officials reached an agreement on ending the sanitation strike. It was 15 years later that we actually came to have an MLK Day, and why people ask that we use this day as a day of action, not a day off, but a day on, to process our grief with courage. Thank you.
We are so blessed in this community to have Rev Michelle serving us and sharing stories at a deep level. Dear ones, I want to invite us to just take a deep breath and to allow this story to sit in our hearts for just a moment longer. And I want to invite us to shift into this reverent time of sharing the joys and the sorrows of our gathered community. If you would like to, you can place a hand over your heart to be able to listen from a heart-centered place as I share some of the joys and sorrows. I will place stones into the bowl and we'll read aloud the joys and the sorrows of our gathered community. Thanks to folks who were able to send them to me in advance. And certainly we will be holding all of the joys and sorrows shared in our chat this morning as a community. Today we share a joy from Connie Volk. Thank you for the outpouring of support regarding my nephew's feasting fire. Glad you're getting supported, Connie. We have a sorrow this morning from Elizabeth Osta. My dear cousin Maureen is losing her battle with COVID. Her breathing is compromised with no options. She chose not to be vaccinated. This makes the loss doubly sad. So we will drop a stone in the bowl for Maureen and for Elizabeth, for all those who know Maureen and all those who know Elizabeth. Dear ones, I will drop 2 stones into our bowl. 1 stone to honor the many joys of our community. 1 stone to honor the sorrows. And we will drop 1 final stone to represent all of the joys and the sorrows left unspoken in the silent sanctuaries of our hearts. May all be held in the heart of love. Today and every Sunday, we light a white candle to acknowledge that we are a congregation and a community that is living through a pandemic together. We have been lighting this candle for, I don't even know, maybe over a year now. We didn't do it at the beginning. For about a year now. May this candle's flame hold our experiences around this horrific disease, around this pandemic, our many shifting and pivoting lives. May this candle also hold our different fears, our griefs, our learnings, our joys, and our hopes. May this candle serve as a beacon of hope and a reminder that we are not alone. Dear ones, as we prepare this morning to pray, as we prepare our hearts and our spirits to pray, I want to share a quote that one of you sent me this past week. And it's a quote about being in between. And it felt like it spoke to this person's experience, and I wonder if it speaks to yours. It's a quote from Erin Overby from a New York Times article about Alexander Hemans' book. The quote says, "It can feel sometimes like we are contained in a kind of stasis, floating in a limbo state as we observe, and only observe if we're lucky, the destructive currents all around us. We are waiting for our lives to resume, for tragedy and loss to no longer define us, and for our existence, as this author Heman puts it, to become recognizable again. In this spirit, let us pray. Spirit, source, deepest love, wide grace. We are here together in this in-between space, limbo, stasis, waiting, observing. For some of us, it feels like life has been put on hold. A pause button pressed, and we don't yet know when we will get back to play. For some of us, life is moving too fast. Changes requiring our response, more and more moments to pivot. For some of us, we are learning new things and adapting to ways of being that better fit our lives. For some of us, we find ourselves in the present moment, one that feels unrecognizable in light of who we previously were. Hold us here. Hold us in the learning. Hold us in the limbo. Hold us in this stasis. As we find ourselves living with the memories of what was and observing the present moment, unsure of what is to come, the timeline or the trajectory is. Hold us here. Help us to be with it, to sit with it, to ask these waiting days what they can teach us. Help us to reach out to those we love, to share our experiences. Show us a pathway towards the support we need to be here in this present moment. To honor this experience, to give it room to breathe and move in us, to allow whatever is to be gained from this experience to blossom in our hearts and in our spirits. There have been deep moments of despair, as well as joy in this new phase of life. Show us how to be honest about these experiences. Show us who we can trust to share our truths with. Spirit, may this community continue to nourish and sustain us in moments of in-between. May we find in our relationships with the sacred a way into this moment. In this holy community of seekers and learners and ordinary people, we lift up our hearts, knowing that we are held by a larger love holding all. In the name of that love, this morning we pray. Amen. Blessed be, and may it be so. Dear ones, let us enter into some silence to check in with our hearts and minds and spirits in this in-between time. Our hymn of contemplation this morning is hymn number 6, Just as Long as I Have Breath. Let us join hearts and voices in singing together. Dear ones, this morning's sermon is based on a song, an electronic music song from a friend of mine, an artist, Galen Tipton. She wrote this beautiful song, Courageous Grieving. I'm going to tell you, it is not usually the music that we listen to on a Sunday morning, but I'm really actually going to invite you, I'm going to play it for you this morning as our reading. And I want to invite you to engage with it however you like. If you feel like you want to turn off your camera and dance around a little bit, if you just want to sit here and observe, however you would like to interact with this piece of music, I just want to give you that invitation. It's a beautiful piece, and so I'm just going to share it with you now, and then we'll talk about it.
Galen Tipton, nowhere else.
Now, you may be wondering to yourselves, what the heck does this song have to do with Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday? I'm hoping that you all had a little dance party over in your space. I definitely had a little dance party over here at church just for a second. So I want to share with you a little bit about this song and about my friend Galen. So Galen wrote this song, Courageous Grieving, for her album, God X. And she wrote about this album that she wrote it following a breakup and in the midst of coming out as a non-binary trans girl. I'll just read you a quote from her. I started working on the record during the ending stages of an abusive relationship and the breakup and recovery that followed. During this time, I was also coming into my identity as a non-binary trans girl. The girl part was something that had been on my mind for a long time, and it was starting to feel like the right time to own that aspect of myself. She shares a little bit about the album. She was watching a lot of anime at the time as a coping mechanism to all of this emotional turmoil. Mostly shonen type stuff where weak characters suddenly had immense amounts of power to take on any obstacle. This EP that it comes from, God X, was imagining myself as this type of character, able to take on anything from internal struggles to social constructs that want me and others like me dead. So what I want to tell you about this song is that this is a song that comes from deep grief. This is a song that comes from the grief of realizing you must leave an abusive relationship. It comes from pain and difficulty. It comes from suffering. And what I am pondering today is around the beauty that can come out of our grief. The courageous actions that we find ourselves inspired to take by our own broken hearts. And I want to say here that I don't think that our hearts need to break in order for beauty to exist in the world. Theologically, that's a little bit funky for us, not really our style. I'll say that. I would say that certainly both beauty and suffering, beauty and grief exist in the world, and sometimes are in relationship with one another. But I also think that multiple things can be true, that beauty can exist without necessarily having to be in relationship to suffering, and that suffering can exist without necessarily having to be in relationship to beauty. I think so often we want to paint suffering in this sort of picture of, yes, we learned all these things, all this beautiful meaning was made out of it. Sometimes suffering is suffering. Sometimes that's what it is. And for those of us who feel closest, especially to experiences of suffering and grief right now, we know how hard it is to find that beauty in the midst of it. So this morning we're not being asked, I would never ask any of us to shore up to an impossible human task. But I do want us to recognize the beauty that can come out of grief and loss. We have to honor that this morning. We have to talk about it. I believe grieving is a courageous act. And I can relate to what Michael shared in our call to worship this morning, that for me, sometimes I don't always want to go straight to grief out of fear, out of avoidance, out of something coming up inside of me. It actually brought to mind a story from my 12-step experience where I was speaking to one of my sponsors at one point about a relationship in which I was experiencing some tension, a family relationship. I kept going back and expecting different things every time, and the person kept giving me sort of the same piece, the same thing every time. And my 12-step sponsor at one point said, the honest thing, the courageous thing to do is to grieve this relationship. Grieve your expectations. Just face the grief. The honest and courageous thing to do is to grieve it and not try to hold on to it or come back expecting something different. And so in that way, maybe she saved me a bit of misery. I'll tell you, the grieving was hard and it was painful. But I'll also say it was real and honest, and not trying to stay in the illusion or the delusion that somehow things were going to change, that somehow this person was going to change. Dear friends, sometimes the honest thing to do is to grieve. And of course, we come this morning to Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday, to a time when we really don't talk about Martin Luther King Jr.'s death and what followed. Right? So much of this day is so often about what he said in his life and the life that he lived and the different pieces that he inspired. And yes, we have to focus on those pieces today and this weekend. And I think right now we have a lot to learn from what people did as they were grieving, and to also recognize grief's role in the whole civil rights movement, which was essentially a response to Black death again and again and again. I'm struck this morning in our story from Rev. Michelle that even this sanitation workers' protest came after the death of 2 sanitation workers. That was a protest and a response to grief. And I really appreciate that Rev. Michelle drew this connection for us to today, to what is happening in our country, what has happened in our city, what is happening in our world. I know that she mentioned George Floyd, and to me, of course, what I think about in our city is the summer of 2020 and the death of Daniel Prude. I think about what we saw as a congregation as this was unfolding, as this was happening. I think sometimes about members of our congregation cleaning up after a broken window and finding pepper bullets around our church building. I think about the courageous act that this congregation took to open up our doors when we were not even worshiping here, to open up our bathrooms when we were not even really using them ourselves, to take the risk in the midst of COVID, to make sure that people's bodies were cared for as they came out and expressed their grief courageously. The decision that we made to open our building during that time period was extremely courageous and was something that came, I believe, out of our own grief and pain in the face of this situation that was so horrible and awful. I know for me, there were so many times of looking to Daniel Prude's brother, Joe Prude, as he was speaking publicly, and just wondering what is going on in his heart and in his mind and in his spirit. To be grieving and to be out here speaking regularly about your brother's death. Wow. Dear ones, I want to connect this even more closely to the present day. And what I want to tell you is that our congregation has been undertaking a new project. And somehow, the theme of these projects is around restroom access. I don't know how or why. It's not really the most, sexy or shiny justice issue. But I want to share with you all that our commitment to accessible restrooms is being taken up right now for especially homeless folks downtown in our city of Rochester. I am part of a group of people here in our congregation, members, as well as folks in the downtown community, as well as city council members, as well as some local business developers is now who's getting involved to advocate for 24/7 restroom access downtown. Not just in the wake of the protests that happen here regularly, but also because we have so many houseless neighbors who are not able to take care of their bodies, their basic physical needs. And we also know that restroom access is about more than just the houseless. It's for all of us. And that we know that we also need to make restrooms that are accessible for all body types and accessible for all kinds of people, including gender-wise accessible. I have to tell you, this comes out of a grief in this congregation, a long-standing grief around some of the cleanup work that has been involved with being downtown. And what I have to tell you is this is an incredibly courageous response. What we could do as a congregation is to continue to fill in the gaps. And what we generally will do is to continue to fill in the gaps, to show up where we are needed, to do what we are asked. And yet, we are not just here to fill in the gaps right now. We are taking the courageous act of advocating in our city and making sure that restroom access is available to all. And I think that's really just the beginning of what our work together is going to be. And I really want to make sure that you all know about this because it's amazing. We're going to be going to speak to City Council about it on Tuesday night. I hope to, if some of you are there, if some of you can watch the video, please come see what we're here to say and what we're talking about. Because we are doing this work because we know it is our mission to nurture the spirit and to serve the community. We know we cannot nurture spirits until everyone's basic needs are met. We know that we must serve our community by advocating in this way and by taking this call. We are called towards a vision of equality and honoring the needs of all by a larger love that holds us all, by our first principle that focuses on the inherent worth and dignity of every single person. No exceptions. No one is outside of that realm. And it may feel small. It may feel like just a drop in the bucket. It's not the most exciting work in the world. But I will say we are using our grief to advocate courageously for the rights of all to have access to a basic human need in downtown Rochester. In the months and years ahead, I am so wondering what are going to be the actions, the courageous acts that are going to come out of the deep griefs of this time period. I'm wondering if you can think of some examples in your life where you're seeing people act courageously in light of their own grief. Times when you have seen folks out of their heartbreak, pain, and sadness show up for one another. Speak out. Engage in some of those courageous acts that we mentioned the last time we were here last Sunday. I wonder in what ways we will be transformed by our griefs in this moment, just as we were transformed by the grief at the death of Martin Luther King Jr., just as we have already been transformed by the grief we are surrounded by daily, now, in this present moment. It is shaping us. It is shaping who we are. Dear ones, this morning, what I am hoping for you is that you are able to find courage and beauty in the wake of your own griefs. I am hoping for you that this church's work and advocacy for justice is blessed on this day. And I'm so grateful to get to share it with you. And I am hoping that you remain connected to a larger love that calls us towards more justice, more freedom, more action, more courage, more risk. Dear ones, may we remember that we do this work out of love. And that, of course, we also do this work out of heartbreak. And may we just be tender with ourselves and hold that today. Amen. Blessed be, and may it be so. As we honor the lives that are a part of our legacy, a cloud of witnesses, as well as the lives here present in this room right now, let us sing hymn number 86, Blessed Spirit of My Life.
Let me
As we extinguish our chalice here at First Universalist Church, and you extinguish your chalices in your own homes, let us read together our words on the screen to extinguish our flame. We extinguish this flame, but we keep its light in our hearts with its message of love and justice, taking it outside these walls to the world we live in until we are together again. Dear ones, I'll invite all of you now to turn your view to gallery view so that you can see everyone who is here, to look upon the faces of all who are here. Let us reach out to the edge of our screen, creating a circle, an unending line, unbroken by this time period, unbroken by the circumstances of our lives. Oh, dear ones, today, this week, I wish you to go forth and to do courageous things with your grieving and broken hearts. I wish you space to tend to the grief, and I wish you space to hold gratitude for the beauty in our worlds, to be in touch with what is beautiful and what is alive. And may we be in touch with all of these things out of the knowledge and the sense that we are loved. May we know that we are loved, and may we go forth and be that love to whomever we may meet. Blessed be, amen. And may it be so. Dear ones, today at the end of our service, following our postlude, all are invited to coffee hour to connect with one another and to have an opportunity to discuss today's sermon. We will take a 10-minute break and come back for coffee hour. As we come to a time to close our service, I'll invite you to follow the benedictions with the words, "I commit to courageous grieving." Please join us in typing these words into the chat together as we enjoy our postlude from Brock Chesfold.